these negotiations and these talks will be all done on a rolling basis, that 19% is the current level for now, but that there's room for it to go down maybe in the coming years?
Yes, we don't know. We are hoping so, because 19 is still less than 32, and most importantly, it's going to be relatively lower than our competitors, in the sense that, therefore, the sourcing decisions, including the potential relocation for investments and the diversification of the supply chain, hopefully will benefit us. And in fact, our analysis does show that we are going to be able to offset the potential negative impact from a 32% tariff. If we had 19%, we could actually offset it from minus 0.6% impact on our GDP to 0.5% positive on the GDP growth, and on exports, investment, and most importantly, employment. We will be able to avoid, hopefully, the potential retrenchment in our labor-intensive industries and exports, which have been the worst hit with the 32% tariff.
And I want to go to the layoff, the potential for unemployment rising in Indonesia with the absence of this trade deal. But I want to go back to one point with regards to the tariffs, because just because you're lower now or slightly lower than Vietnam does not mean that Indonesian goods are already cheaper than that of, say, goods in Vietnam or Southeast Asia. In fact, we did hear from Philippine officials the other day that even before the tariffs, Philippine goods were already 15% more expensive than Vietnam, regardless of the fact where the tariffs were actually sitting. So I want to know, from the Indonesian context, how competitive or how much cheaper or pricier were Indonesian goods versus Vietnamese goods even before some of these tariffs were actually rolled out? And does this really make a dent or make Indonesia more competitive now as compared to, say, before?
Good question. We recognize that it's obviously not just the relative tariff differences, but also the differences in productivity and competitiveness. We know that at the moment we are still perhaps slightly lower in terms of competitiveness compared to China or Vietnam, just because a lot of the ecosystem is not yet built out here. But we also know that from the buyers that they are intending to diversify more. And Indonesia is one of the locations for diversification. Therefore, apart from addressing the tariff issue, we are also addressing how to make ourselves more competitive and increase our productivity through deregulation reforms. And we have a specific task force now looking at the labor-intensive sectors to make sure that we are facilitating any investments, we are facilitating the exports, reducing the cost of doing business, and hopefully attracting also parts of the supply chain. Because one of the issues, as you know, in the way the U.S. is looking at imports coming from Southeast Asia, is they don't want illicit transshipment, and they also are trying to make sure that it's a diversified content. So I think this is going to be an important part of the way you can access the U.S. market. But obviously what we want to do is to have a diversified supply chain which is competitive and productive, not just for addressing the U.S. market, but wider. So another additional important point is that Indonesia was able to almost complete its EU-Indonesia SEPA, which will be an important also attraction for the relocation of investments, because we will then be on par with Vietnam in terms of the access to the European market.
Ibu Mari, I'm glad you brought up the issue of transshipment, and with regards to the U.S. deal with Vietnam, that's about a 40% rate on goods that are transshipped right through Vietnam. As far as I've seen, it doesn't apply in Indonesia's framework agreement with the U.S. How are you able to hold that off or stave it off?
I think you didn't read the Truth Social carefully enough. Actually, we will. Basically, even though they don't mention a number, President Trump didn't mention a number. He did mention transshipment in the last Truth Social posting on Indonesia deal, that he does mention transshipment. Our interpretation is that it'll be similar like Vietnam. If there is transshipment, then there will be an additional 19% imposed on us. Even though at the moment, of course, Of course, we don't quite know what is meant by transshipment. Our interpretation is illicit transshipment. And we are all, Indonesia, Vietnam, and ASEAN, I think, in general, are all in agreement that we do not also want illicit transshipment, where you're just relabeling this wherever it's coming from, and then you relabel it and you say it's coming from Indonesia. The key will be in strengthening the issuance of the country of origin, monitoring through the customs, cooperation in customs. This is what we have been also offering to the U.S. That how can we jointly monitor to avoid illicit transshipment. If it's a broader interpretation of transshipment, this is something that is still being discussed, and there's nothing specific there yet.
Right. And this might also relate, Ma'am Pangestu, to the non-tariff barriers that the U.S. has stressed they want to focus on more, especially with trade talks with Indonesia and other countries. One other sticking point, it seems, that might have been partially resolved is the local content requirement for investment and for goods in Indonesia that the U.S. wanted to see come down. However, it can be argued that the local content requirement was key in creating a lot of jobs and upskilling a lot of jobs in Indonesia. Is there a concern that if local content requirements are perhaps relaxed or abandoned in Indonesia because of this trade deal, that it could actually impact jobs and unemployment in Indonesia in the short to long term?
I don't think so. I think in fact, in April, going back to the importance of deregulation and reforms that are key to Indonesia's response to the uncertainty in the world situation, including the trade negotiations, the president made a very clear call in April for deregulation and reforms, including reforming the local content rules, not to abandon them, but to improve the way that they are being implemented, to reduce the cost of doing business in Indonesia, but at the same time still having a very good, the intention of local content policy is to develop local industries. So how do you do it instead of penalizing, more incentivizing, and having a process where you also have policies that facilitate the development of the local industries. And for the ones that are already developed and already have the local content rules, it's not about abandoning them, as long as the bottom line is they're competitive. They're not imposing higher costs to the end users. So I think we are currently reviewing it. So part of our response to the U.S. is also part of our overall review of our local content requirements to make sure that we balance the issue of trying to develop our local industries, but not adding cost to the users, and therefore our competitiveness and productivity.